We are 1 week away from President's Day, and today we're learning new details about the religious life of one of America's founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. Joining me via Skype is Dr. Mark Belials. He's the author of a new book, Doubting Thomas, The Religious Life and Legacy of Thomas Jefferson. Hello, Dr. Belials. Thanks for being here.
Hello, Mark. Glad to join you. Thank you.
What inspired you to write this book?
Well, I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's hometown, and as a pastor here for so many years and a historian, I finally decided I needed to go to the original sources because Jefferson is, probably the most, I think, misunderstood and yet often quoted of all of our founding fathers. And I think there's so many distorted views out there that I just felt like, people need to get more firsthand knowledge, and so that's why I do this.
How did you come up with the title Doubting Thomas?
Well, probably the main thing people think of Jefferson today, and especially a lot of times evangelical Christians, is that he was a doubter. He wasn't really a believer. He was a person, and this is the way most biographies present him, as a person who rejected traditional Christianity and wasn't connected to any church, and a lot of that kind of, or he was a deist, or these kinds of terminology. So my title of Doubting Thomas, especially, it has a question mark after it, basically saying, is all of that true? And there's certainly a legacy he has left that surrounds him that isn't necessarily, in my book I present, is not necessarily aligned with the facts.
Well, what is the Jefferson Bible?
The Jefferson Bible is something that Jefferson did that he never published. It was something he never showed to a single person his whole life, but it was something he started while he was president in the White House. He was just trying to compile all of the moral teachings of Jesus. In fact, that's the title he originally gave to it himself, was an abridgment of the New Testament for the use of the Indians, because he had just purchased the Louisiana Territory, and missionaries were asking for something to use for getting out there to all these new thousands of dialects. And so, but anyway, he compiled this, what he thought would be better, just a little compendium of the moral teachings of Jesus, and that's what later on, much after he was dead, people published it, called it the Jefferson Bible, but he never called it that.
So would you say he was a believer? Was he a born-again Christian?
He called himself a Christian. It's important to know. And throughout most of his life, he was a person that never said or did anything that would call that into question, really, except unless you were a political opponent in the presidential campaign. He was attacked some for that. But late in life, he did question some of the belief in the Trinity. But even when he did this, we're talking about in his 70s and his retirement years, he always did it privately. And it was in discussion with other Unitarians, people who believed that. And so he was having some expressing of some of his own doubts about that. But throughout most of his life, he was a very active, committed churchman, and even to the very end of his life, he actually was always a member of the Episcopal Church, Trinitarian Church. That's where he worshipped his whole life.
Now, the book you've written touches on the separation of church and state. Can you talk about that?
Well, certainly that's what most people probably are always debate about, because his letter to the Baptists in Connecticut in 1802, while president, talked about a wall of separation between church and state that the Supreme Court used to, throw out Bible reading and prayer in public schools. But Jefferson clearly, throughout his life, while governor, he proclaimed a day of thanksgiving and prayer. While he was president, even though he didn't make a proclamation of prayer, he funded different kind of religious groups in the federal territories. In his view, as long as religion was not something that the federal government, the national government, was imposing on the states, on their prerogatives, and was not coercing any kind of belief, then he felt like religion in public life was fine, and so it was with those kinds of parameters.
I understand the book has letters written by Jefferson that have never been published until now. Quickly tell me about them.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most surprising things. The papers of Jefferson, the official papers, have never published about 16 years of his life, some of the letters of his life there. And what I did was go back to the original letters, and I went through all of these, and I found about, in all, over 50 letters or so that still had never been published that have some references to religion in some way. And so, yeah, so I put those into our book, some of those into this book, Doubting Thomas, another book, a companion reference book. I did more of those letters called, but yeah, it's something I think it's clearly people need to still realize there's so much more that we can learn about this founding father.
Very true. Well, the book also highlights some of the overused documents you say are, quote, less reliable for understanding Jefferson's beliefs. Can you explain why they are unreliable?
Yeah, because you see what's you find in almost every biography that almost the predominance of the quotations of Jefferson are things that were either private letters that he never publicly expressed, never intended people to know, or more importantly, when I say less reliable, they were letters he never even sent. They were drafts that he discarded, or were just private notes that had no commentary, no sense of, is this his final conclusion? Is this really what he believes? And yet that is what people don't realize. That's what most modern biographers quote, those sort of unsent, unused notes that are a little bit less certain to say this is what he wanted people to hear that he believed.
Okay. Dr. Mark Belial is once again the author of the new book, Doubting Thomas, The Religious Life and Legacy of Thomas Jefferson. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
You're very welcome. And now I don't know if you can mention our website, doubtingthomasbook.com. They can find more information there. Thank you.